Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. This is the second part of the Canon RP review and deals with the field test of the camera. For the technical review of the RP, I've included a card here somewhere, and I will also include the link on the description of this video. Before we get into the details of the field test, I really want to take a minute here to thank you all that commented in my previous videos and that let me know that the background music was way too loud and distracting. I really appreciate the feedback, guys, and please keep doing that because it really helps me to improve the quality of my videos. Let's start from the beginning, which is what were the aspects that I was testing in Banff. I tested the dynamic range, the color depth, low light performance, which relates to ISO and noise, and I also tested the battery life and the video quality of the camera when shooting in 1080p and 60 frames per second. I brought two RPs to Banff. One was used with the kit lens attached to it, and the other one was used with the RF70-200 f2.8L glass. The pictures I will show here were taken only with the RP using the kit lens because I wanted to test the camera without the benefits of having the L glass in front of the camera. Okay, jumping into the meat of this video. The first aspect that I've evaluated on this camera was the dynamic range. The idea I had for testing the dynamic range was to shoot a very contrasty scene. Then I would expose my shot for the highlights and I will try to recover the details from the shadows during post-processing. I could have tested the camera also overexposing the highlights and then trying to recover the details on them. But for my personal preference, I always expose to the highlights, as I comment on one of my videos about exposure. As a side note, that are more elaborated tests that can be done to test the dynamic range, but I decided to test the camera using a real-world situation, rather than preparing a setup only for the sake of testing the dynamic range. After walking around a bit, I found a composition using an Airstream travel trailer and the sun setting down behind some of the peaks surrounding the campground. Let's open Lightroom and take a look at these shots. So that's the raw file straight from the camera. No editing was applied, no corrections applied so far. I would like to just to go over like what would be a little bit like I would bring the highlights down a little bit here just to try to recover a little bit more details here. I know that this area here is it's clipped, but that's the sun, so I expect the sun to be clipped, and I can just recover a little bit of the details of the shadows. Like I could bring all the way up. You see I still have details here, even though at 200% I will have some noise here, but for my editing process I would probably not go that far. I would probably go here because I kind of like the overall contrast between the bright areas here and the trees just on the shades here. But yeah, I'm really happy with the overall dynamic range of this camera. In my editing process, I usually won't open the shadows all the way to +100, nor bring the highlights down to -100, as the picture looks quite unnatural for my liking when I do so. Because of that, the dynamic range captured by the Canon RP is enough for the type of photography I do, since I know that if I am shooting a very contrast image, I will have some pure blacks where there will be no details on the picture. But if having a really wide dynamic range is important for you, you can use exposure bracketing. It only means a little bit more time on post-processing, but it would get the maximum level of details on all areas of your shots. And this can be used for all digital cameras, not only the RP. Moving to the color depth, I decided that I would put the RP to the test during a sunrise at the Vermilion Lakes, which are located just outside of the town of Banff. I got lucky, and in one of my days I've stayed in Banff, there was a gorgeous sunrise with lots of colors like pinks, magentas, oranges, blues. So the test was really fun to do. Let's see some of the shots. I'm pretty happy with the way the camera captured all the different tones on the sunrise. I would probably only correct the white balance a bit, but as you can see on the right side of my screen, there is no corrections applied whatsoever. Just to remind you, this is the RP with the kit lens. Look at this other tighter shot here. Same thing, no corrections or editing applied, and the colors look pretty good straight off the camera. The next aspect evaluated was the low light performance of the camera. And to do that, nothing better than a little bit of astrophotography, correct? On my very last night in Banff, I got some 40 to 50 minutes of really clear skies. So I decided to grab the cameras and head out to Lake Minnewanka for this part of the field test. As I was using the kit lens, which has a maximum aperture of f4, I knew that I would have to push the ISO of the RP really high to keep the shutter speed to a value that wouldn't cause too much start trailing. After some test shots, I fixed my maximum shutter speed at 20 seconds using the minimum focal length of the kit lens, which is 24 millimeters. There was some start trailing happening, but for the sake of the test, they were negligible. I varied the ISO from 3200 to 6400. So for each one of the compositions I found there, I took a total of 4 shots. I'm not going to show them all here, but I choose one of the compositions that I liked the most. So let's see the shots now. As you can see, for the ISO 3200, the shot's quite dark and there are not really many stars around. There is noise, but the amount can be reduced a lot during post-processing. Let's compare this shot with the others. For the shot with the ISO 4000, there is not much difference. There is a bit more noise and the image it's a little bit brighter. Comparing now with the picture taken with ISO 5000, we can see more stars, but also more noise as expected. This noise starts to be a little bit too much and we are losing important details on the mountains on the background. On the picture taken using the ISO 6400, we have way more stars visible, but at the cost of having quite a bit of noise. This noise can be reduced during post-processing and probably won't be noticeable depending on the size of the screen or the print. This one was the one that I posted on Instagram after post-processing, and it looks perfectly fine there, but I don't think I would print this picture in anything larger than a 5x7. Because I feel like the noise would be way too visible and the mountains would appear way too soft for my liking. On this case, the best idea would be invest in a good super wide and fast lens. If I was using a lens with an aperture of f2 for example, I would be able to keep my ISO around 2000 for the same 20 seconds of shutter speed. And using an aperture of f2, f2.2, which means that I would have less noise and more quality to the image. However, even shooting at ISO of 6400, I was able to get a picture that looked good on my monitor and that I could post on my Instagram. So I'm pretty happy with the ISO performance of this $1300 camera. Let's talk about the battery life. That, for me, is really the biggest issue with this camera. As predicted, the battery performance of this camera was way less than ideal, and the winter temperatures in Banff didn't help at all here. I didn't track precisely how many times I changed the batteries of my cameras, but I can assure you that it was roughly, and I'm not exaggerating, 1 battery per day. I had an inverter connected to the lighter of my truck to keep the spare batteries charging, and really that was the only thing that kept me from running out of batteries in the middle of a hike. And this also brings me to another problem. For some reason, it seems that not all portable power chargers will work with this camera. So if you're planning on a hike or several days with the RP, you will need to check if the charger you're going to use works with it, or you'll be carrying way more extra batteries for this camera, which can get quite expensive if you're buying the original Canon batteries, which cost like roughly $90 a piece. Another comment that I would make here is that I hiked quite a bit with both bodies, and what a relief it was. When I was hiking with my DSLRs, I would always end up the day with some pain on my shoulders, my back, and with the Canon RP, I didn't have nothing at all. For me, being small and lightweight are huge pros of this camera for any kind of landscape of outdoors photography. Another great thing about this camera is the ability of recording videos in 1080p up to a maximum of 60 frames per second. All of the B-roll that you guys saw until here was recorded using the Canon RP and the kit lens. So I'm pretty happy with the fact that I can record this some B-roll that I can use for my Instagram and my YouTube videos. I didn't record nothing in 4K because, like I mentioned before, there is a heavy crop on the image, and also records only in 24 FPS, which is good for more of a cinematic view, but it doesn't allow for slowing the videos to create that nice and smooth slow-mo effect. One more item that was evaluated during the trip on a more unwillingly way. My harness broke and dropped one of the RPs face down on the ground. So something not that fun. My harness just broke and dropped the baby first time on the ground. I didn't try to turn it on yet. Let's see if it survived. That's really a bummer. It malfunctioned, presenting some problems with the contacts between the camera and the lens. But after staying turned off overnight, for some reason, it started working again and has been working so far. I'm recording the video on the same camera that I dropped. We're almost at the end of this video, so now it's a good time to share with you guys kind of a bonus feature that I didn't know about until a few days ago when I was already back from Banff. The RP can create time lapses straight in camera. So instead of setting up my camera and trigger and taking hundreds or thousands of pictures and then manually putting them together to create the time lapse, the Canon RP does it all for you. You just need to access a menu when you're on the video mode, and the camera will shoot and process the time lapse and create a video file for you. I tested this feature yesterday with some beautiful northern lights where I live. Now we are at the very end of this video and it's time for my conclusions. Overall, I'm really satisfied with the performance of the camera, even more considering how much it costed. The dynamic range could be better for other people, but that's something that can be dealt with by bracketing the exposure like an HDR shot. For my style of editing, like I mentioned before, I don't usually push the shadow slide to plus 100 or the highlights to minus 100, so the dynamic range that the camera is able to capture really suits my needs. The color depth of this camera is fantastic, even more when I compare it with my previous DSLRs. I'm really amazed by the color nuances I can capture with the RP, even when I'm using the kit lens. I'm also really pleased with the low light performance of this camera, but if that's something that you're really interested in, be aware that you can produce decent shots with the kit lens, but you might consider buying a faster and wider lens. But even here, there is a benefit by using the RP. It is so inexpensive in comparison with the other cameras that you can use the difference to cover for most of your astrophotography lens. One last comment is that all of these parameters that are analyzed, they are interdependent. The dynamic range and color depth will deteriorate with increasing ISO. So anything you can do to keep the ISO lower on your shots is going to be really beneficial for the overall quality of your pictures. That's all that I have for today, guys. I really hope that this video was useful for you. I will put more shots that I took with the Canon RP during my time in Banff at the end of this video, so be sure to check them out. If you have any questions, suggestions, or comments, please just leave me a message here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you on the next one.